For centuries, the Habsburgs ruled across Europe, their influence stretching from the sun-drenched plains of Spain to the icy peaks of the Austrian Alps. They commanded vast armies married into royal lines and shaped the very map of the continent, but behind the glittering crowns and grand palaces lay a chilling truth. Their lineage, a tapestry woven with power and ambition, was also drenched in an almost unbelievable stream of personal heartbreak, madness, and violent death. This family, seemingly touched by divine right, experienced a level of suffering that even today leaves historians breathless. Get ready to uncover the 10 most heart-wrenching stories from a dynasty touched by fate, or perhaps by their own blood. Number 1. Empress Elizabeth Sisi of Austria. She was the original rebel royal, a woman of breathtaking beauty and restless spirit, yet her life was a gilded cage that led to profound sorrow and a shocking end. Born Duchess Elizabeth in Bavaria. In 1837, Sisi possessed a wild, unconventional charm that stood in stark contrast to the stiff formality of most European. Her childhood was spent freely, far from the rigid etiquette that would soon become her prison. She adored riding horses, rambling in the countryside, and writing poetry. No one expected this spirited girl to become the empress of one of Europe's most powerful empires. Yet fate intervened. Emperor Franz Joseph I was supposed to marry her older sister, Helene, but at a summer gathering his eyes fell upon the 16-year-old Elizabeth. He was instantly captivated, declaring his love and insisting she would be his bride. This sudden, unexpected engagement swept Sisi into a world she was utterly unprepared for and desperately unsuited to. Her wedding in 1854 was a grand affair, but the joy quickly faded. The Viennese court was a viper's nest of strict rules and protocols. Sisi, with her natural aversion to formality, struggled immensely. Her formidable mother-in-law and Aunt Archduchess Sophie immediately took control of every aspect of Sisi's life, including raising her children. Sisi was seen as too young, too frivolous, too untrained to be a proper empress or mother. This constant scrutiny and control crushed her spirit. She felt suffocated, her natural exuberance replaced by a deep melancholy. One of the earliest and most profound tragedies struck in 1857 during a trip to Hungary. Her 2 young daughters, Sophie and Gisela, both fell ill. Sophie, her eldest and her favorite, succumbed to the illness, likely typhoid. At just 2 years old, this devastating loss shattered Sisi. She spiraled into a deep depression, convinced she was unfit to be a mother. This event marked a turning point. She became even more detached from her remaining children, believing that her presence brought them harm. Her relationship with her husband, while initially filled with affection, became strained. Franz Joseph, a man of duty and routine, could not understand his wife's yearning for freedom or her profound sadness. He loved her, but his empire came first, and his inability to truly connect with her emotional turmoil left her feeling increasingly alone. As the years passed, Sisi became obsessed with her appearance, a desperate attempt to exert control over one aspect of her life. She was renowned for her incredible beauty, particularly her famously long, thick chestnut hair that reached her ankles. Maintaining it was an elaborate ritual, taking hours each day. She engaged in extreme diets and rigorous exercise, including hours of riding, walking, and even gymnastic routines in her private gymnasium. This pursuit of physical perfection was less about vanity and more about a desire for escape, a way to channel her restless energy and control her inner turmoil. She built a reputation for being elusive, avoiding public appearances and formal events whenever possible. Instead, she traveled almost constantly, seeking solace in remote places like Corfu, Hungary, and Ireland. She yearned for solitude and the simple freedom of movement. Her journeys were legendary, often undertaken with minimal staff, seeking anonymity and a reprieve from the relentless glare of her royal duties. She became an enigma, a beautiful, melancholic ghost drifting across Europe, a queen who desperately wanted to be anyone but herself. The greatest bow to Sisi arrived in 1889 with the Mayerling incident, the shocking death of her only son and heir, Crown Prince Rudolf. Rudolf, a complex and troubled soul, much like his mother, was found dead with his young mistress, Mary Vetsera, in a hunting lodge. The official explanation was a heart attack, but the truth was a murder-suicide. Rudolf's death plunged Sisi into an even deeper abyss of grief and despair. She never truly recovered. The loss of her son, with whom she shared a complicated but deeply felt bond, cemented her morbid fascination with death. After Mayerling, she almost exclusively wore black, becoming even more reclusive and eccentric. She would wander the palace halls, sometimes holding conversations with imaginary figures or reciting her own dark poetry. She sought comfort in spiritualism and seances, desperately trying to connect with her lost son. Her life became a relentless pursuit of oblivion, a way to escape the pain that clung to her like a shadow. Her end was as unexpected and tragic as her life. On 10 September 1898, while walking along the shore of Lake Geneva in Switzerland, Sisi was approached by an Italian anarchist named Luigi Lucchini. He carried a sharpened needle file which he plunged into her heart. Sisi, remarkably, did not immediately realize the severity of her injury. She continued, walking clutching her chest before collapsing. She was helped onto a boat, where she lost consciousness and died shortly after. Her last words, according to accounts, were, "What happened to me?" This final brutal act brought a swift, shocking end to a life that had been a long, slow torment. Elizabeth of Austria, the empress who sought freedom through beauty and endless travel, found her ultimate escape in an assassin's hand, leaving behind a legacy of haunting beauty and profound sorrow, a true embodiment of the Habsburg curse. Number 2. Crown Prince Rudolf of Austria. He was the hope of an empire, the only son of the reigning emperor and the beloved empress. Yet his life was a torment of unfulfilled potential and deep personal conflict that ended in a dark, shocking pact. Born in 1858, Archduke Rudolf was the golden child, the male heir so desperately desired by the Habsburg dynasty. From a young age, he displayed exceptional intelligence and a keen mind, particularly for science and the natural world. He was a stark contrast to his rigidly traditional father, Emperor Franz Joseph, and far too sensitive for the harsh military training his tutors imposed upon him. His early education was brutal, with one tutor reportedly waking him with pistol shots, a method that left him terrified and prone to nervous disorders. His mother, Empress Elizabeth, recognized his sensitivity and intervened, demanding a change in his education, but the damage had already been done. Rudolf grew up brilliant, but deeply troubled, longing for the intellectual stimulation his mother offered, but rarely received, and constantly clashing with his conservative father. Rudolf's relationship with his parents was complex and often strained. His mother, Sisi, was herself a restless spirit, often absent from Vienna and emotionally distant. While she recognized his intellect, she struggled to provide the consistent maternal presence he needed. His father, Franz Joseph, was a man of duty and tradition who found his son's liberal views and intellectual curiosity unsettling. Rudolf openly criticized the rigid bureaucracy and the conservative policies of the empire, often publishing articles under pseudonyms that advocated for progressive reforms, religious tolerance, and even a more democratic form of government. This put him at direct odds with his father, leading to bitter arguments and a growing chasm between them. Rudolf felt stifled by the expectations of his royal role, seeing himself as a bird in a gilded cage, unable to truly influence the course of his nation. His personal life was equally fraught with unhappiness. In 1881, he entered into an arranged marriage with Princess Stephanie of Belgium. The union was loveless from the start. Rudolf found Stephanie uninteresting and intellectually inferior, while Stephanie struggled to understand her husband's complex and often melancholic nature. They had one daughter, Elizabeth Marie, but the marriage was plagued by infidelity on Rudolf's part, and he likely contracted a venereal disease, possibly syphilis, which further damaged his health and mental state. He grew increasingly desperate, turning to drink drugs like morphine and a string of mistresses to escape his overwhelming unhappiness. His health deteriorated both physically and mentally. He suffered from severe depression, anxiety, and a deep sense of nihilism. Letters from this period reveal a man consumed by despair, obsessed with death, and convinced that his life held no purpose. He had inherited his mother's melancholic temperament, but lacked her ability to find solace in escape or art. As the years progressed, Rudolf's mental state worsened. He became increasingly isolated, feeling misunderstood by his family. And the court, he spoke openly about suicide to friends and confidants. In early 1889, he met Baroness Mary Wetzera, a 17-year-old noblewoman from a prominent family. Mary was beautiful, impulsive, and utterly infatuated with the crown prince. She saw him as a romantic, tragic figure, and was willing to do anything for him. Rudolf, in his profound despair, found in Mary a desperate companion for his dark thoughts. He proposed a suicide pact to her, which she, blinded by her devotion, accepted. The stage was set for one of the most infamous and tragic events in European royal history. On the night of 30 January 1889, Rudolf and Mary traveled to his hunting lodge at Merling, a secluded estate in the Vienna woods. What exactly transpired behind the locked doors of the lodge remains shrouded in some mystery, but the outcome was undeniable. The next morning, Rudolf's valet discovered the bodies of the crown prince and Mary Wetzera. Rudolf had shot Mary in the head, and then himself. The news sent shockwaves across Europe. The imperial court immediately launched an elaborate cover-up to protect the monarchy's image. Rudolf's death was initially announced as a heart attack, and Mary's body was spirited away and secretly buried. But rumors and leaks soon revealed the horrifying truth. The scandal was immense, a devastating blow to Emperor Franz Joseph, who had lost his only son, and to Empress Elizabeth, who retreated further into her world of grief and eccentricity. Rudolf's death threw the Habsburg succession into disarray, and is often seen by historians as a crucial turning point, a dark omen for the empire that would eventually crumble just a few decades later. His brilliant mind, his progressive ideals, and his deep-seated despair all culminated in a violent, desperate end. A testament to the heavy burden of a Habsburg crown. Number 3. Maximilian I of Mexico. He was an Austrian archduke, with a dreamy, romantic spirit, lured by the promise of an exotic throne, only to be betrayed by those he trusted and ultimately executed by the very people he sought to rule. Born Archduke Ferdinand Maximilian in 1832, younger brother to Emperor Franz Joseph, he was a man of charm, intelligence, and an artistic temperament. Unlike his older brother, who was a stickler for duty and routine, Maximilian was a free spirit, passionately interested in botany, architecture, and sailing. He built a magnificent castle, Miramar, overlooking the Adriatic Sea, and explored distant lands as a naval commander. He seemed destined for a life of leisure and intellectual pursuits, far from the rigid political struggles of his family's empire. However, his ambition, coupled with his romantic idealism, led him down a path of unimaginable tragedy. The fateful opportunity arose from the turmoil in Mexico. In the 1860s, Mexico was in political chaos, deeply in debt to European powers. Napoleon III of France, seeking to reassert European influence and establish a puppet regime in the Americas, saw an opportunity. He proposed to Maximilian that he accept the crown of Mexico, promising full French military support and a warm welcome from the Mexican people. Maximilian, despite warnings from his more pragmatic brother Franz Joseph and other European monarchs, was captivated by the idea of building a new empire, a modern, enlightened monarchy in the New World. His beautiful and ambitious wife, Princess Charlotte of Belgium, known as Carlota, fully supported the venture, eager for a crown of her own. In 1864, after much deliberation and against the advice of many, Maximilian and Carlota sailed for Mexico, confident in their grand adventure. Their arrival in Mexico City, however, quickly revealed the harsh reality behind Napoleon III's promises. The Mexican people were deeply divided. While a conservative faction initially welcomed Maximilian, the majority, led by the fiercely nationalistic Benito Juarez, viewed him as an invading usurper. Maximilian, with his European ideals of benevolence and reform, struggled to understand the complex political landscape. He tried to implement liberal reforms such as abolishing peonage and promoting religious freedom, which alienated his conservative supporters. Yet his foreign origins and dependence on French bayonets prevented him from winning over the liberal factions. He was a monarch without a true base of support, a well-meaning but ultimately naive figure caught in a brutal civil war. The tide began to turn against Maximilian when Napoleon III, facing increasing pressure at home and a rising threat from Prussia in Europe, made the devastating decision to withdraw his French troops from Mexico in 1866. This left Maximilian exposed and vulnerable, his imperial dream crumbling. Carlota, heartbroken and increasingly desperate, embarked on a frantic mission back to Europe, pleading with Napoleon III and Pope Pius IX for continued support. Distress and betrayal were too much for her fragile mind. She suffered a complete mental breakdown, becoming paranoid and delusional, and spent the rest of her long life in seclusion, never seeing her husband again. Maximilian was urged by his brother and others to abdicate and return to Austria, but his sense of honor, perhaps mixed with a stubborn idealism, refused. He felt he could not abandon the loyalists who had supported him. He chose to stay and fight. Maximilian and his loyalist forces retreated to Querétaro, where they were besieged by Juarez's Republican army. After a lengthy and brutal siege, Maximilian was betrayed by one of his own generals and captured in May 1867. A military tribunal quickly tried him and sentenced him to death. Despite pleas for clemency from numerous European monarchs, including Queen Victoria and Victor Emmanuel II of Italy, Juarez, determined to make an example and assert Mexican sovereignty, refused to commute the sentence. Maximilian faced his fate with dignity. On the morning of 19 June 1867, he stood before a firing squad on the Hill of the Bells in Querétaro. His last words were reportedly, "Mexicans, may my blood be the last shed for the welfare of the country, and if it is necessary for my companions to shed theirs, may it flow for the good of the nation. Viva Mexico." He handed gold coins to his executioners, asking them to aim for his heart so that his face would not be disfigured. His death, a brutal and public execution, sent shockwaves through the royal houses of Europe and forever stained the already tragic history of the Habsburg dynasty. He was a romantic who chased a dream only to find himself entangled in a nightmare that cost him his life, a poignant symbol of ambition unhinged from reality. Number 4. Marie Antoinette. She was born into the heart of Habsburg power, the youngest daughter of a formidable empress, yet her journey led her to a foreign land. A life of lavish excess, a role as a hated queen, and ultimately, a brutal end. Born Archduchess Maria Antonia in 1755, the 15th child of Empress Maria Theresa, her early life in Vienna was privileged but disciplined. She was charming and lively but not particularly academic, preferring music and games to studies. At the tender age of 14, she was sent to France to marry the Dauphin Louis, the future king. This marriage was a monumental diplomatic alliance, meant to solidify peace between Austria and France, two long-time rivals. Marie Antoinette arrived in France, stripped of her Austrian identity, reborn as Marie Antoinette, the future Queen of France. Her early years at the French court were a challenge. She was young, naive, and unprepared for the intricate politics and rigid etiquette of Versailles. Her shy, awkward husband, Louis, struggled to consummate their marriage for many years, a public humiliation that fueled whispers and doubts about the strength of the monarchy. Lonely and eager to fit in, Marie Antoinette sought solace in fashion, extravagant parties, and her beloved Petit Trianon, a private retreat on the palace grounds. She became a trendsetter, inspiring elaborate hair tolls and luxurious gowns. However, Her lavish spending and her perceived indifference to the suffering of the common people quickly earned her the derisive nickname Madame Deficit. She was often blamed for the nation's financial woes, even though the debt was centuries old. The infamous affair of the diamond necklace, in which she was wrongly implicated in a massive fraud, further solidified her image as a frivolous and corrupt queen, even though she was innocent. As the financial crisis deepened and discontent grew among the French populace, Marie Antoinette became a symbol of everything that was wrong with the monarchy. She was isolated from the people, surrounded by sycophants and rumors. Her attempts to connect with her subjects, such as building a model farm at Petit Trianon, where she could play at being a milkmaid, were seen as patronizing and out of touch. The infamous quote, "Let them eat cake," though almost certainly never uttered by her, perfectly captured the public's perception of her callous disregard for their suffering. The storming of the Bastille in 1789 marked the beginning of the French Revolution, a cataclysm that would sweep away centuries of royal rule and ultimately consume the royal family. The royal family was forced from the grandeur of Versailles to the constrained confines of the Tuileries Palace in Paris, becoming virtual prisoners. The situation steadily worsened. The monarchy's attempts to escape, most famously the ill-fated flight to Varennes in June 1791, failed miserably and irrevocably destroyed any remaining public trust. They were seen as traitors conspiring with foreign powers to suppress the revolution. Louis XVI was formally deposed and put on trial. In January 1793, Louis XVI was executed by guillotine, leaving Marie Antoinette as the widowed citizen Capet, stripped of her royal titles and dignity. She was separated from her children, a pain that tore at her heart. Her young son, the Dauphin, Louis Charles, was taken from her and subjected to terrible abuse, a torment that haunted her final days. In October 1793, Marie Antoinette herself was put on trial before the Revolutionary Tribunal. The charges against her were numerous and often absurd, ranging from treason to inciting civil war. The most horrifying accusation was that of incest with her young son, a vile lie designed to thoroughly demonize her in the public eye. Despite her calm and dignified responses, the outcome was predetermined. She was found guilty and sentenced to death. On 16 October 1793, Marie Antoinette, once the radiant Archduchess Maria Antonia of Austria, was led to the guillotine. She wore a simple white dress, her hair cropped for the execution. She maintained her composure, even stepping on the executioner's foot and politely apologizing. Her final journey through the streets of Paris was a spectacle of public hatred and derision, but she faced it with a quiet strength that surprised her accusers. Her execution marked the end of an era and the tragic culmination of a life that began in imperial luxury, but ended in revolutionary terror. A stark example of how swiftly fortune can turn for those caught in the maelstrom of history. Number 5, Charles II of Spain. He was the last and most tragic of the Spanish Habsburgs, a king whose very existence was a testament to the devastating consequences of generations of inbreeding. Known as El Hechnidoi, or the Bewitched, Charles II was not merely unlucky. He was born into a biological nightmare, a living monument to a family obsessed with maintaining its bloodlines through relentless intermarriage. His parents, Philip IV and Mariana of Austria, were uncle and niece. This was not unusual for the Habsburgs, but after almost 2 centuries of such close unions, the genetic toll on Charles was catastrophic. Born in 1661, he was a sickly, frail infant whose survival was constantly doubted. His childhood was a litany of physical and mental infirmities that would plague him his entire life. From birth, Charles displayed extreme physical deformities. His famous Habsburg jaw was so pronounced that his upper and lower teeth could not meet, making chewing and speaking incredibly difficult. His tongue was so large it often hung from his mouth, causing him to drool uncontrollably and struggle with articulation. He had a large malformed head and was so weak and frail that he could not walk until the age of 4, and did not learn to speak until he was 8. Even then, his speech was often unintelligible. His intellectual development was similarly stunted. He was slow to learn, had difficulty concentrating, and likely suffered from a severe intellectual disability. Contemporary accounts describe him as sickly, constantly ill, and prone to seizures and other unexplained ailments. He was physically and mentally a shadow of a man, a stark contrast to the powerful monarchs who preceded him. Despite his severe incapacities, Charles II ascended to the Spanish throne in 1665, at the age of 4. His long reign until his death in 1700 was a period of constant decline for the Spanish Empire, not due to his direct malevolence, but due to his profound inability to govern. He was a puppet king, his decisions swayed by competing factions of courtiers, ambitious nobles and foreign powers who saw Spain's weakness as an opportunity. His court was a hotbed of intrigue and power, struggles with his regents and ministers vying for control, while the king himself was often isolated in his private chambers. Tormented by his physical pain and mental confusion, his physical ailments made him appear even more feeble and contributed to the widespread belief that he was indeed bewitched or possessed by demons. Exorcisms were performed and superstitious remedies were tried, all to no avail. The most pressing concern of his reign was the succession. Charles II was married twice, first to Marie-Louise of Orleans and then to Maria Anna of Neuburg, but both marriages remained childless. This inability to produce an heir exacerbated the crisis facing Spain. The thought of the Spanish Habsburg line dying out after centuries of dominance filled the court with dread and desperation. As Charles's health deteriorated further, the major European powers began to scheme and plan for the division of his vast empire. He suffered increasingly from debilitating pain, convulsions, and mental delusions, confined to his bed and unable to move. His emaciated body was riddled with disease. An autopsy performed after his death revealed a severely malformed and atrophied body, confirming the horrors of his genetic legacy. Charles II died on 1 November 1700 at the age of 38, bringing an end to the direct line of the Spanish Habsburgs. His death, however, did not bring peace. On his deathbed, under immense pressure, he named Philip, Duke of Anjou, a grandson of Louis XIV of France, as his successor. This decision, aimed at preserving the unity of the Spanish Empire, instead ignited the War of the Spanish Succession, a brutal and bloody conflict that engulfed Europe for over a decade. Charles II was a man born to suffer, a tragic figure who bore the physical and mental burden of his ancestors' choices, leaving behind a kingdom in turmoil and a legacy as the living embodiment of a dynasty's demise. His life was a slow, painful deterioration, a cruel fate for a monarch who never truly had the capacity to rule, a poignant reminder of the fragility of even the most powerful bloodlines. Number 6. Joanna of Castile. She was a queen by birth, a mother to emperors, yet history remembers her primarily as Juana la Loca, Joanna the Mad. Her life was a heartbreaking saga of passionate love, devastating loss, alleged mental instability, and a crushing imprisonment that lasted for more than 4 decades, imposed first by her own father, then by her son. Born in 1479, Joanna was a daughter of 2 of history's most powerful monarchs, Isabella, the First of Castile, and Ferdinand II of Aragon, the Catholic monarchs, who united Spain and launched its golden age. She was intelligent, well-educated in languages, history, and philosophy, and by all accounts highly capable. No one could have predicted the tragic path her life would take. Her destiny, like that of many royal children, was shaped by dynastic alliances. In 1496, she was sent to marry Philip the Handsome, Duke of Burgundy, a modest and strikingly handsome Habsburg prince, son of the Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian I. This marriage was meant to forge a powerful alliance between the burgeoning Spanish power and the formidable Habsburg Empire. Joanna, who was known for her intensity, fell deeply and passionately in love with Philip. Their connection was immediate and fierce. A rare, genuine affection in a world of arranged marriages. However, Philip, despite his charm, was a serial philanderer, frequently unfaithful to Joanna. Her intense devotion to him, combined with his frequent betrayals, fueled a profound jealousy and emotional distress in Joanna. She would reportedly fly into rages, tearing at her clothes and refusing to eat. A stark contrast to the composed demeanor expected of a princess. Some historians believe these early episodes were signs of a fragile mental state, perhaps exacerbated by postpartum depression after the birth of her children, or simply the understandable anguish of a devoted wife betrayed. The true turning point in Joanna's life, and the event that cemented her tragic fate, was the sudden death of her beloved Philip in 1506. He succumbed to a fever, possibly typhoid, at the age of just 28. Joanna was utterly devastated, her grief consuming her entirely. Her behavior became increasingly erratic and disturbing. She refused to let Philip's body be buried, instead traveling across Castile with his coffin for months, sometimes opening it to gaze upon his decaying corpse and kiss his feet. She would reportedly sleep in the same room as the coffin, often with the lid ajar. This public display of overwhelming grief, combined with her earlier erratic behavior, provided the perfect pretext for political manipulation. Her father, Ferdinand II, seeing an opportunity to regain full control of Castile, which Joanna had inherited from her mother Isabella, declared her unfit to rule due to alleged madness. In 1509, he confined her to the convent of Santa Clara in Tordesillas, ostensibly for her own good. She was held there, isolated and effectively stripped of her power, while her father acted as regent. When Ferdinand died in 1516, Joanna's eldest son, Charles V, the future Holy Roman Emperor, continued her imprisonment. Charles, who would become one of the most powerful rulers in European history, feared that releasing his mother might empower rebellious nobles or foreign powers who could use her as a figurehead against his rule. He visited her only rarely, and her conditions were often austere, sometimes bordering on neglect. For 46 long years, from 1509 until her death in 1555, Joanna remained imprisoned at Tordesillas. She was Queen of Castile and Aragon, theoretically, but never truly ruled. Historians still debate the extent of her madness. Was it a true psychological illness? Perhaps schizophrenia? Or a severe depressive disorder exacerbated by trauma and isolation? Or was she a victim of cynical political maneuvering, a strong-willed woman whose emotional intensity and unconventional behavior was simply exploited by ambitious men who craved her power? The truth likely lies somewhere in between. Her long, lonely confinement, the psychological torment of her isolation, and the manipulation by her own family make her one of the most profoundly tragic figures in the Habsburg lineage. She was a queen without a kingdom, a mother without her children's freedom, and a woman whose heart, broken by love and loss, became a symbol of sorrow and betrayal. Number 7. Don Carlos, Prince of Asturias. He was the highly anticipated heir to the most powerful throne in Europe, the son of Spain's formidable king, Philip II. Yet his life was a short, brutal descent into physical suffering, mental instability, and ultimately a mysterious death in captivity, ordered by his own father. Born in 1545, Don Carlos's life was marked by tragedy from the very beginning. His mother, Maria Manuela of Portugal, died just 4 days after his birth. From complications related to childbirth, this immediate loss cast a shadow over his early life. Carlos was also born with physical deformities, including one leg shorter than the other and a curvature of the spine. These physical ailments, combined with his parents being first cousins, led many historians to believe he suffered from the severe effects of the Habsburg family's notorious inbreeding, which often resulted in physical and mental debilitation. As Carlos grew, his physical infirmities were accompanied by alarming behavioral problems. He displayed an incredibly violent temper, often lashing out at servants and even animals with shocking cruelty. Stories describe him torturing animals, pushing a page down a flight of stairs, or attempting to kill his tutor. He was unpredictable, impulsive, and prone to fits of rage. A severe head injury sustained in 1562, when he fell down a flight of stairs, seemed to exacerbate his already troubled mental state. After the accident which nearly killed him, his behavior became even more erratic and paranoid. He reportedly believed people were conspiring against him, and his animosity towards his father, Philip II, grew increasingly intense. The relationship between Don Carlos and Philip II was deeply strained. Philip was a meticulous, controlled, and deeply religious monarch. Dedicated to the affairs of state, Carlos was wild, undisciplined, and resentful of his father's authority and constant disapproval. He was nominal Prince of Asturias, the heir apparent, but Philip never allowed him to participate in government, believing him too unstable and unreliable. Carlos, feeling sidelined and deprived of his rightful role, harbored a deep resentment. He was also reportedly engaged to Elizabeth of Valois, a French princess. But Philip later decided to marry her himself for diplomatic reasons, further fueling Carlos's sense of betrayal and anger. Carlos began to scheme and plot, reportedly attempting to flee Spain to the Netherlands, where he hoped to lead a rebellion against his father's rule, possibly with the support of Dutch Protestants. Philip II, known for his cold pragmatism and unwavering sense of duty, could not tolerate such threats to his authority or the stability of his kingdom. In January 1568, in a dramatic and unprecedented move, Philip II personally led a detachment of guards into his son's chambers, disarmed him, and placed him under arrest. Don Carlos was imprisoned in a tower in the Royal Alcazar of Madrid. His windows were bricked up and he was held in solitary confinement. Accounts from this period describe his increasingly bizarre behavior in captivity. He would reportedly starve himself for days, then gorge himself on enormous quantities of food, drink excessive amounts of ice water, walk naked in the cold. His mental and physical health rapidly deteriorated in confinement. Don Carlos died just a few months later, on 24 July 1568 at the age of 23. The official cause of death was illness, possibly dropsy or dysentery, exacerbated by his extreme behavior and poor health. However, rumors of poisoning or that he starved himself to death spread quickly across Europe. Philip II maintained a stoic, almost indifferent public facade after his son's death. But the mystery surrounding the circumstances fueled suspicion for centuries. Historians largely agree that while Philip II did not directly poison his son, his imprisonment and the conditions of his confinement almost certainly contributed to Carlos's rapid decline. The tragedy of Don Carlos lies not just in his early demise, but in the cruel irony of his existence. Born to rule the most powerful empire, yet cursed by his own lineage, and ultimately confined and left to die by the very father who created him. His story remains a dark stain on the glittering tapestry of the Spanish Habsburg dynasty, a chilling reminder of the lengths to which power could go even against one's own blood. Number 8. Emperor Franz Joseph I. He reigned for an astonishing 68 years, leading one of Europe's oldest empires. Yet his life was a relentless testament to personal loss, a seemingly endless parade of loved ones taken by tragedy, leaving him a solitary figure, burdened by duty and sorrow. Born in 1830, Franz Joseph ascended to the Habsburg throne in 1848, a turbulent year of revolutions. Across Europe, he was just 18, thrust into power with an unwavering commitment to duty and tradition. He dedicated his life to his empire, working tirelessly, from dawn until late night, often at his famously Spartan desk. He married Empress Elizabeth Sisi, a woman he loved deeply, but who was destined to bring him as much heartache as joy. Their union was initially passionate, but Sisi's restless spirit and aversion to court life meant she was often absent, leaving Franz Joseph to navigate the rigid world of monarchy. Avon, the first personal tragedy struck early in their marriage. In 1857, during a trip to Hungary, their two young daughters, Sophie and Gisela, fell ill. Little Sophie, their firstborn and a child Franz Joseph adored, died at the age of 2. This devastating loss deeply affected both parents, particularly Sisi, and cast a long shadow over their family life. For Franz Joseph, it was a painful early lesson in the fragility of life, even for royals. He buried his grief beneath layers of duty, believing that focusing on his work was the only way forward. The mid-1860s brought another crushing blow, this time involving his ambitious younger brother Maximilian. Maximilian, lured by the promise of a crown and the support of Napoleon III, accepted the title of Emperor of Mexico. Franz Joseph had warned him against it, sensing the inherent instability. Despite his warnings, Maximilian embarked on his ill-fated adventure. When Napoleon III withdrew French troops, Maximilian was left exposed and ultimately captured. Franz Joseph made desperate pleas for his brother's life, but they were ignored. In 1867, Maximilian was executed by firing squad in Mexico. This brutal public execution of his own brother, a fellow sovereign, was a profound shock and humiliation for the emperor. A stark reminder of the dangerous realities of power, but the worst was yet to come. The year 1889 brought the most shattering blow. The Mayerling incident. His only son and heir, Crown Prince Rudolf, a bright but troubled young man with whom Franz Joseph had a complex and often strained relationship, was found dead with his young mistress Mary Vetsera in a hunting lodge. The official story was a heart attack, but the truth, a murder-suicide, eventually leaked out, creating an immense scandal across Europe. For Franz Joseph, this was an unbearable personal catastrophe. The loss of his only son, the future of the dynasty, was a void that could never be filled. He was forced to cover up the scandal, adding to his silent suffering. The Mayerling tragedy plunged him into an even deeper well of grief, and he became even more stoic and withdrawn. His face etched with sorrow, his personal tragedies continued to accumulate. In 1898, his beloved eccentric wife, Empress Elizabeth, was assassinated by an Italian anarchist in Geneva. Sisi, who had often sought freedom from her royal role through constant travel, died suddenly. This was a cruel irony, a final shocking blow for a man who had loved her deeply, despite their differences and separations. He reportedly stated, "Nothing has been spared me in this life." A poignant reflection on the relentless sorrow he had endured. He carried her photograph with him everywhere for the rest of his life. The long reign of Franz Joseph was a study in profound, sustained personal tragedy. He outlived his brother, his first daughter, his only son, and his wife. He also saw his nephew, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, become the new heir, only for Franz Ferdinand to be assassinated in Sarajevo in 1914, an event that directly triggered World War I, the very conflict that would ultimately lead to the collapse of his beloved empire. Franz Joseph died in 1916 at the age of 86, in the midst of the Great War. He was spared the sight of his empire's final dissolution, but his long life had been a relentless series of losses. A man perpetually in mourning, symbolizing the slow, painful decline of an ancient dynasty. He was the stoic emperor, the ultimate dutiful monarch, but beneath the layers of protocol and power, he was a man broken by a lifetime of unbearable personal sorrow. Number 9. Archduchess Sophie of Austria. She was just a toddler, a bright and cherished firstborn, yet her brief life ended in a swift and devastating illness, leaving behind a heartbroken mother and casting a long, dark shadow over the imperial family. Born in 1855, Archduchess Sophie Friedrich Dorothea Maria Josepha was the eagerly awaited first child of Emperor Franz Joseph I and Empress Elizabeth. Sisi. Her birth was a cause for immense celebration within the Habsburg court. She was named after her formidable paternal grandmother, Archduchess Sophie, a woman of immense influence within the imperial family. The little Archduchess was adored by her father, Emperor Franz Joseph, who was delighted by his lively daughter. However, from the very beginning, Sophie's early life was marked by the intense, often stifling, atmosphere of the Viennese court and the complex dynamics between her young, unconventional mother and her strict traditional grandmother. Archduchess Sophie the elder believed that Sisi was too young and inexperienced to raise her own children. As a result, she largely took charge of Sophie and her younger sister Gisela, who was born 2 years later. The children were removed from Sisi's direct care, an arrangement that caused Empress Elizabeth immense distress and contributed to her growing unhappiness within the marriage. Sisi loved her children, but the constant interference and the feeling that they were not truly hers deeply wounded her spirit. She longed for a deeper connection with her daughters, but the strict court protocols and her mother-in-law's control made this nearly impossible. In the spring of 1857, when Sophie was just 2 years old, the imperial family embarked on a visit to Hungary. This was a significant political gesture aimed at mending relations between the monarchy and the often restive Hungarian populace. Despite her own fragile health and personal discomfort with public appearances, Sisi accompanied her husband and, against the advice of her mother-in-law, insisted on bringing her 2 young daughters, Sophie and Gisela, along on the journey. It was a rare opportunity for her to spend uninterrupted time with her children, away from the suffocating atmosphere of the Schönbrunn Palace. However, this seemingly innocent decision would lead to unimaginable tragedy. During their stay in Budapest, both Sophie and Gisela suddenly fell ill. They developed high fevers and severe diarrhea, symptoms now recognized as indicative of a severe gastrointestinal infection, most likely typhoid fever, which was rampant in the crowded cities of the 19th century. Medical understanding and treatment in that era were primitive, especially for young children. While Gisela slowly recovered, little Sophie's condition rapidly worsened. Despite the frantic efforts of the imperial physicians, the Archduchess, barely a toddler, succumbed to the illness. She died on 29 May 1857 in her mother's arms. The death of Sophie was a catastrophic blow to Empress Elizabeth. It was not just the loss of a child. It was the loss of her firstborn, a vibrant young life that had brought her fleeting moments of joy amidst her unhappiness. Sophie's death plunged Sisi into a profound and lasting depression from which she never truly recovered. She blamed herself for bringing the children to Hungary and became convinced that she was fated to bring misfortune to those she loved. This tragedy cemented her already fragile mental state, fueling her melancholia, her obsessive pursuit of beauty as a form of control, and her lifelong wanderlust as a desperate escape from her grief. She became even more detached from her remaining children, particularly her son Rudolf. Fearing that closeness would only lead to further loss, the joy and innocence of her early years were extinguished. Sophie's short life and untimely death became a pivotal moment in the tragic narrative of Empress Elizabeth, setting her on a path of relentless sorrow and eventually contributing to her own tragic end. The little Archduchess, taken too soon, became a silent, enduring symbol of the deep well of personal suffering that flowed through the Habsburg dynasty. Number 10. Joseph II, Holy Roman Emperor. He was an enlightened monarch, a tireless reformer, driven by a genuine desire to improve the lives of his subjects, yet he died, a broken man. Convinced he had failed in everything he undertook, his grand visions largely undone by the very people he sought to uplift. Born in 1741, Joseph was the eldest son of Empress Maria Theresa, one of the most powerful and effective rulers in Habsburg history. From a young age, he was deeply influenced by the ideals of the Enlightenment, believing in reason, progress, and the welfare of the common people. He devoured books, engaged in intellectual debates, and was impatient to implement radical changes, a stark contrast to his cautious and pragmatic mother. This difference in temperament often led to friction between mother and son, as he chafed under her long reign, eager to wield power and transform his sprawling empire. His personal life was also marked by, in 1760, he married Isabella of Parma, a beautiful and intelligent princess, with whom he fell deeply in love. Their bond was intellectual and emotional, a rare, genuine affection. In a world of political marriages, however, Isabella was frail and suffered from depression. She tragically died of smallpox in 1763, just 3 years into their marriage, leaving Joseph utterly devastated. He never truly recovered from her loss, carrying her letters and cherishing her memory for the rest of his life. His second marriage, to Maria Josepha of Bavaria, was a loveless affair, undertaken purely for political reasons, and she, too, died shortly after. Again, from smallpox, Joseph was left without a male heir, a deep personal and dynastic concern that haunted him. These early losses undoubtedly contributed to his austere demeanor and his relentless dedication to work, a way to channel his grief and escape personal pain. When he finally ascended to the throne as Holy Roman Emperor in 1780, after Maria Theresa's death, Joseph II wasted no time in implementing his sweeping reforms, earning him the nickname the Traveling Emperor, due to his constant journeys across his lands. He was a whirlwind of activity, seeking to rationalize and modernize every aspect of his realm. He issued the Patent of Toleration in 1781, granting religious freedom to Protestants and Orthodox Christians, a revolutionary step for Catholic Austria. He abolished serfdom, giving peasants personal freedom and greater rights, a radical move that threatened the power of the nobility. He secularized church lands, reduced the power of the Catholic Church, dissolved numerous monasteries, and established state-controlled schools. He reformed the legal system, abolished the death penalty in many cases, and introduced a unified tax system meant to apply equally to all, including the nobility. He believed in one unified, centralized state, free from regional differences and traditional privileges. However, Joseph's reforms, though well-intentioned, were often implemented with a heavy hand and without sufficient consultation or preparation. He moved too quickly, attempting to force profound societal changes upon a populace deeply rooted in tradition and privilege. The nobility resented the loss of their feudal rights and tax exemptions. The church opposed his secularizing policies. Even the peasants, whose lives he sought to improve, sometimes resisted, as the new systems were often confusing and disruptive. Revolts broke out in the Austrian Netherlands and Hungary, regions fiercely protective of their historical autonomies. Joseph, with his rationalist mindset, could not understand this resistance. He genuinely believed his reforms were for the good of his people, and their opposition often left him feeling bewildered and bitterly disappointed. His final years were a litany of setbacks and growing disillusionment. The costly and largely unsuccessful war against the Ottoman Empire further drained the imperial coffers and popular support. His health, always fragile, deteriorated rapidly, exacerbated by his relentless work ethic and mounting stress. As he lay dying in February 1790, he was consumed by a profound sense of failure. He famously requested that his epitaph read, "Here lies Joseph II, who failed in everything he undertook," while the exact wording might be apocryphal. It perfectly encapsulates his despair. Almost immediately after his death, many of his most radical reforms were reversed by his successor, his brother Leopold II, who sought to restore stability. Joseph II, the idealistic emperor, died, feeling utterly defeated. A tragic figure whose genuine desire for progress was thwarted by the inertia of history, the deep-seated resistance to change, and the crushing weight of his own unfulfilled expectations. He was a monarch ahead of his time, whose ambition to enlighten his people ultimately led him to a solitary, agonizing end.